So then how does the show itself actually come about? As somebody who wasn't aware of it, I mean, was aware of the name and that it existed. How is it that that the whole thing came to be?
The show came about because Walking Dead took off in 2011. It went from this little zombie show on AMC to, a worldwide phenomenon.
Yeah.
And when AMC, the network, saw that, in their minds, their Walking Dead's based on a comic book. So they're like, holy crap, there are comic book fans out there. There are comic fans who will watch a TV show based on a comic book. Let's make more shows based around comic books or that world. And, the execs were like, well, that's a great idea. What do you got? Well, they're like, well, we don't got anything. They're like, well, who can we get a good idea from? They're like, well, how about Kevin Smith? He's king of the nerds. He would know what to do.
He's been talking comic books for forever.
Yeah.
In his movies
let's call
and
him up.
on stage.
Let's get his advice. And they ended up contacting him. They're like, hey, we're thinking about doing some kind of comic book based TV show, off the success of The Walking Dead. Maybe we could air it between that long gap between seasons of The Walking Dead to keep people's interest. Is this something that you would want to work on? He's like, no, not really. I'm pretty busy. And they're like, okay, well, it's like, then they were like, well, if you did work on a show like this, what would you do? And he was like, you know what? If it were me, if it were up to me and I was to do a TV show right now, you know what I would do? I would rip off that TV show Pawn Stars, but instead of them selling, whatever jewelry or old documents or whatever, why don't you put inside of a comic book shop, and the transactions could be between, like rare and vintage toys and comic books. That's the show that I would watch. That's the show that I would make, if I had that power. And they were like, congrats, great. You just developed a TV show.
Wow.
Welcome aboard. He was like, well, wait a minute.
Yeah, just the idea that no, there are people who actually live this, and with pop culture becoming mainstream culture, or I should say, comic culture and superheroes working their way more into pop culture, I should say. Then here's something that this is an opportunity nobody's taken. But at that point, it was finally, once again, like you said, him being ahead of the curve in a lot of ways.
Oh, yeah.
Here's something where, the culture caught up to something he's been doing and talking about and preaching the gospel about for decades at that point. Here's the opportunity.
I remember being there when the pitch meeting was happening. I wasn't even there. I wasn't supposed to be there. They went out for breakfast or whatever. And they came back to the stash, and they were talking, and they're like, well, what do you envision the show being? And Brian and Walt had said, this is, we'd make this place like Cheers, and people come in, and we help them with their problems. And they're like, what else you got? And they're all looking around at each other, and Ming's like, and I was opening the stash then, I'm opening the stash. And I said, there are stories that happen here every day. We have kids who come in who've run away from home and yada, yada, yada. And they came over to me and they're like, really, keep going. And, I told them a couple of stories that had happened. And, we've got this drunk who, comes in for his books. We've got people who sell us stuff because, they can't make rent, whatever. And they're like, yeah, like Pawn Stars, but with a heart or whatever. And I'm like, oh, sure, why not?
They were like, all right, well, now, we need a comic book shop, and then we need to, I guess, go around the country and find, 3 or 4 guys to be in the show.
Oh, they wanted to cast it? Oh, man.
Yeah, they wanted to cast it. This is stage one, square one.
Right.
Like, okay, you have this idea. What do we need? Okay, we need a comic book shop. We need guys to run the shop for the show. Then we need to, find customers to buy and sell stuff, that we can find later on.
Right.
And so it wasn't us from the beginning. They were going to go find a shop somewhere in America, then find, 4 dudes in America and to be on the show. Well, now you have to shoot a pilot episode. You got to put together like a 15-minute trial episode to show the executives, to make sure that, so they can see that this concept will work. Then they'll give you more money and you can make a season. So I remember Kevin, he was like, so what's our budget on this thing? And they're like, oh, they gave us $10,000. And he's like, is that a lot? That doesn't sound like a lot. And they're like, no, it's really not a lot of money to shoot something like this. And plus most of it is going to go to, like a location fee. Like we're going to have to rent a comic book shop somewhere, probably give him at least half this budget.
Ding.
And And he's like, wait a minute. Well, I got a comic book shop. You can shoot there. I won't charge you anything. Just put the money toward spend the money on making it a good production.
Right.
And I remember like I guess they didn't know he had a shop. They're like, dude, why didn't you tell us this like 3 weeks ago that you had a shop? They didn't know for whatever reason. And they were like, well, what about, we need the comic book men. We need the guys to work the shop. He's like, well, just use the guys that are in there already. I've got a staff. I got this guy Walt. He runs a store. This guy Ming, he's at the store and he runs my website. Mike, the assistant manager, and then we got my friend Brian Johnson in there. He'll be real funny too. And they were kind of like, for the pilot, even if you have to tell them what to say, just to structure it, go for it, just to fit your needs for the pilot. But for the most part, they had scripted a couple of things out, but for the most part, we were just off, ended up being us.
Right. You had your dynamic down.
A lot of that. Yeah. So they shot it was about a 15-minute pilot episode. It's very bare bones. You can see the skeletons of comic book men. It's actually not that much different than what you see now. I think there's even a little bit of us at the podcast table. And the transactions, it's very, it's not that far off from what the real show became.
And Kevin had set it up already. He told them this, but they needed the reinforcement that we could probably pull it off,
right.
Which,
and that you guys were funny enough that they didn't need like a writing team, because that's one of those reality TV. It's not even a myth. It's one of those things I think people are just in denial about, that there are writing teams for a lot of these shows. There are comedians or people who are around just to feed funny lines and interesting lines, because most people's day-to-day is kind of boring.
Exactly.
But you guys had a shitload of podcasts for them to refer to.
Of course. And we could,
like, no, they're funny. They don't need any help. Like, just show up.
We could do that because we're used to talking extemporaneously for a living.
Right.
So, not even a living. This was...
Yeah,
I don't think
for recreation.
Exactly. I don't think I've ever gotten dime one from I Sell Comics. I think I got a pillow once, but that's beside the point.
Yeah, when the executives saw that, they're like, "Holy crap, this is funny. This will work." And they ordered 6 episodes.
Nice.
In a first season, and all of a sudden they were like, "All right, we're gonna shoot. You're on a TV show," and it was first I remember getting the call from Kevin. He's like, "Hey, congratulations, you're gonna be on TV." I'm like, "What are you talking about?" He's like, "They saw that. Remember that pilot episode they shot? Like they loved it. They're gonna make 6 episodes." I'm like, "What?" He's
really?
like, yeah. We start shooting in a month. I'm like, oh boy. Because I have no, I had no training.
Right.
I'm not an actor. I did not have dreams of being on a reality TV show.
Yeah, you weren't seeking this out. There are a lot of people who are just looking for this.
I sat behind a computer and uploaded Kevin's podcast onto iTunes. I changed quantity numbers on a stock list on his online store. I'm the IT guy. I don't act.
Right.
But I'm up for anything. So I'm like, all right, this is cool. I think the first thought in my head is like, okay, this is a TV. That's cool. There are a million channels out there. Maybe somebody will watch it. But I think the real first idea in my head is like, wow, the world is going to see how screwed up Walt Flanagan and Brian Johnson are. and how funny. I know, because they definitely have a unique brand of humor.
Oh, yeah.
Until Comic Book Man, that only, us, that only we saw. And I was like, man, I think the rest of the world needs to see this. But coincidentally, also when the execs saw that pilot episode, they saw how we interacted,
Right.
Right from the minute one, I was getting made fun of. Brian was cracking inappropriate jokes. Walt was being Walt, Mike was being Mike. And the executives were pointed over to our podcast episodes. And Kevin was like, hey, you should listen to these. This is how the guys interact in real life. They have podcast episodes. So the executives took a listen at a bunch of our podcast episodes, and they came back and they were like, wow, these guys are really funny. They were like, this is really just them. There's no script or anything. Kevin was like, no, that's just them talking. And the execs were like, wow, if they can be that funny on the podcast, on the TV show, if they can be as funny on the TV show as they are on the podcast, we're going to get like 3 or 4 seasons out of this.
Oh, that's awesome.
We end up getting 7, but yeah, they really...
I don't think people know how unique that actually is in reality TV. The idea, I really think people do believe that all of that happens organically and there happen to be cameras here. Even the notion of taking a group of people who actually are friends, who have a dynamic, who work together, at least at least Walter and Mike technically work together.
Yeah.
But the idea of taking people who are actual group of friends who have this dynamic, who do something together, and not casting it, because so much of that is, so much of reality TV in particular is very much like, we need this type, we need that type, we need that, you need to fit into a certain archetype, there needs to be a villain, all this other stuff. I mean, even though I guess you could break down, you were kind of the whipping boy, Brian's a smartass, Walt is the businessman who's trying to run the business and keep everybody in line. Mike's
Mike's the expert.
He's the expert. He's like the chief nerd. And like you can kind of break it down, but it wasn't contrived. It wasn't something that was put together. This existed.
If you go back and listen to any of the podcast episodes, you'll see those guys are they're more assholes to me in real life than they were on the show, which is, I know it's, for some people it's hard to believe. But
the show's edited to a degree, so they got free reign on a podcast.
Yeah, the show's edited. Yeah, on the podcast. Yeah, there's no editing. There's no, they say whatever they want. It's even worse on the podcast. Brian, he's a grump and he can be a jerk, but he's funny as hell, man.
Yeah, he is.
And he's so good at making fun of people that it's an art.
There was no script. There never was a script. People who say, "Oh, that was all scripted." It's like bullshit. No, this is us. And they cut and pasted. They cut a ton of cursing out.
Right.
Because we were, I mean, Brian and I.
Because you're adults. That's why.
Because
how people
exactly.
talk.
Because Brian and I are we've got the two worst mouths on the crew. It was like, fuck this, douchebag that, you cocksucker, holy shit, everything that we could say.
There's the episode trailer.
There you go.
That's this episode. You've never heard Mike Zapcic like this before?
Yeah. Or
because basic cable won't let him.
Yeah, but we got away with like 2 douchebags and I think 1 shit per episode. So
nice.
Yeah, I know. We were saying craptastic a lot. So yeah.
Yeah, you kind of have to get creative because you're like, this is really funny, but it's going to get cut out. What
exactly.
Do I say
but
in its place?
The best thing is that Brian is so fast that you try to hit and you try not to step on each other.
Yeah.
And that's a talent that Brian and Walt, after 40 years of friendship, should have. I mean, if you
I know the feeling.
Yeah, right.
You've been around us.
Well, I see the footprints on your back. So yeah.
No
stepping on your line, stepping on everything.
Trying to wrangle these folks.
Of course, wrangling is the and it's
that's some self-editing right there. Calling them folks.
I know it's the most thankless job in the world, but that's when you do that. That's when you learn how to do it.
I think the only thing we joke about, Walt does not interact like that with people in real life. He's much more reserved in real life, I guess I should say.
He's not as snarky as he is on the show.
He's not that outgoing on the show, but I think I remember him telling us this. He's like, "Hey, in order for this to work, like I can't be that standoffish." So he decided to kind of take his cues from Buddy from Cake Boss. Animated Buddy is
right.
Where it was like, we made this cake and it wouldn't fit in the van. What are we gonna do? Like that's where that, and he's like, I got to be more like that if this is gonna work. So
it's true.
We call it. We call Kevin coined the term. He's like, oh yeah, that's fake Walt.
And by season 5 or 6, we were hitting our stride. We were like able to pretty much waltz around each other verbally, where we weren't. There were some hand signals used. You see me like doing one of these to Brian, and Brian like doing one of these to me.
You're able to pass the ball in a way that's like everybody's going to get their say. Everyone's going to get their chance for a funny line. And all of that, because it gets very muddy.
It was business as usual. We were doing the same stupid what if scenarios that we would have done had there not been cameras in there.
Right.
Brian would be making gay jokes at me and Mike's expense, even whether there are cameras or not. Those jokes are coming out of his mouth. They would probably edit it to be a little more appropriate for basic cable, but we really didn't wander that far from our true selves.
Those are all genuine laughs. Those are, we're laughing at Brian. Brian is, he is fucking quick. This is stuff that comes out of his head. Like, mainly because he doesn't have much of a filter, but he's got a filter. Because there was one time there was a guy, and I said something so inappropriate that they're like, I don't know if we can salvage this entire segment. We did. But I'm like, oh, so I'm the fucking asshole now. I'm like, oh, okay, great. Thanks so much. And no, but Brian came up to me. He's like, listen. He's like, this is fucking funny. But he's like, even I have my limits. I'm like, yeah, I know. But I had to go for it. So
it's worth a shot. If it doesn't make the cut, that's fine.
Yeah, I know. But yeah, you can't leave anything, you can't leave money on the table.
Totally.
So.
Constantly, even now, people are like, that show's scripted, right? Like, people wrote those lines for you. I'm like, I'm not an actor, so I can't memorize the lines at all.
Kevin's too busy.
Like
he can't write all these episodes. He's got jobs to do,
Yeah, I'm like, that's really us. And then, trying to put words into Brian Johnson's mouth, like trying to script words, it's not going to happen. That guy hates being told what to do, plain and simple. And for him to read off some script that maybe somebody else wrote for him, like that would never happen.
Yeah, that's which again, some people assume, there is that phony element to being a reality show.
I take that as a compliment that they think we're so funny that some professional writers out there wrote those lines for us.
Right.
That's a huge compliment.
It is, because no, you just this is what goes on all the time.